Chapter 6: Tomahawks and Buoys. It is much easier to learn how to throw a tomahawk or hatchet than it is to throw a knife. In fact, from a practical standpoint, the easiest way to master the mechanics of knife throwing is to first learn how to hurl a hatchet or tomahawk. This is because the hatchet throw is basically identical to the overhand handle throw with a knife. If you have already mastered the art of knife throwing, it is very simple to master the hatchet throw almost immediately. The tomahawk is uniquely constructed to bring out the best possible combination of weight and balance for throwing purposes. Compact in design, light in weight, and deadly in the hands of a skilled American Indian warrior, the weapon was a wicked tool for throwing in hand-to-hand combat. For centuries, it was used in the primeval forests and plains of the North American continent by Indians and white frontiersmen alike, as a last resort protection. Unlike the hatchets and battle axes of early Europeans, the tomahawk was a primitive American development. Trappers, settlers, and frontiersmen adopted its use rapidly after some grim lessons in Indian warfare. Only when long-range weapons became more reliable did the tomahawk fade from widespread use. Today, there is a revival of interest among sportsmen in this noble weapon as a throwing instrument. Practically everybody who has been a Boy Scout has enjoyed the experience of throwing his scout hatchet while in camp or on the trail. It was as natural as building a campfire. So, among the vast number of former Boy Scouts who remember the simple technique of throwing a hatchet or tomahawk, there exists a great potential group of tomahawk throwers who can now enjoy the sport as adults. Stance and grip for tomahawk. The thrower can start with the same basic stance he would use for hurling a knife, since the various elements of the throw are essentially the same. The handle, for the overhand throw, is gripped firmly as though you were chopping kindling. The wind-up consists simply of bringing the hatchet back and then swinging it forward in a natural overhand throw. As in knife throwing, the handle should slip from your grasp when the weapon is lined up with the target. There is no wrist snap, and the follow-through should be the same as it is with a throwing knife. Tomahawk throw. Most tomahawk or hatchet throwers are content to hurl their weapon one single spin for the overhand throw with emphasis on accuracy. The tomahawk should not be thrown too hard. As in knife throwing, it is necessary to move forward or backward to determine and mark the exact distance for that perfect stick. If properly embedded in the wood, the tomahawk handle should point downward at a 45-degree angle away from the vertical face of the target. Uses of the Bowie knife. The art of tomahawk throwing is so closely tied to knife throwing that the thrower can hardly get involved with the one without becoming extremely interested in the other. Of all the knives designed through the ages, the classic Bowie pattern is perhaps the most closely akin to the weight and balance of a tomahawk. Its perfection as an all-purpose close combat weapon has been proved in a century and a half of use. It can be used for chopping, thrusting, and slashing, as well as for throwing. The same can be said for the tomahawk. Comparison of Bowie and Gurkha knives. The classic Bowie knife lends itself especially well to the hatchet throw because of its long, heavy, and clipped point blade combined with a comparatively light handle. Only one other well-known knife, with the exception of a professional throwing knife, is balanced and weighted in much the same way, and that is the famed Curry, or Gurkha knife of India. This fabulous weapon is quite similar to both a tomahawk and a large Bowie knife in its balance as a chopping instrument, and is the basic tool of the Gurkhas as well as a symbol of their race. The blade of this great combat weapon of the legendary Gurkha warriors is sharply curved downward and is therefore much more difficult to master as a throwing knife than is a straight-bladed knife such as the Bowie. But with a balancing point at approximately dead center of the overall length, it can be, and is, thrown most expertly by the handle in the simple overhand hatchet throw, especially if hurled by a Gurkha warrior. Tomahawk underhand throw. When a sportsman becomes proficient in throwing a hatchet or tomahawk overhand, he can take on the challenge of the underhand throw. This requires more skill and control and a longer throwing distance for the single spin than does the overhead throw. The weight and balance of the weapon, not necessarily the speed with which it is swung forward, will determine the rate of spin when hurled. Your grip should be taken at the end of the handle with the butt fitted firmly and squarely against the palm of your hand. The cutting edge is pointed toward the target, and the tomahawk, hand, and forearm are lined up as straight as possible. The top knuckle of your first finger should be to the front if you are gripping the handle correctly. Take your stance with the left foot forward, knees slightly bent, and swing the weapon back and forth a few times in the direction of your target in order to get the tomahawk lined up. Then bring it back until your right arm is about parallel to the ground and swing it down and forward smoothly in a full underhand sweep, releasing the handle at the exact moment you feel you are lined up with your mark. A slight flip of the wrist as you make the release will control the spin. Continue to follow through on the upswing after the weapon has left your hand, because the follow-through is still the secret of achieving accuracy with both knife and tomahawk. Knife underhand flip. To throw a knife underhand with the underhand flip, as it is called, use a long, heavy-bladed weapon, which will give you much better control for this type of throw than will a lightweight knife. This style of throwing requires considerable skill and much practice to achieve proficiency. Control depends on the degree of speed and the amount of spin you impart to the blade as it flips from your hand. Actually, it is much more a fast toss than a throw, somewhat similar to pitching horseshoes. The knife is gripped by the handle or blade in the exact manner described previously for the overhand knife throw. The thumb is kept uppermost since the knife should always be thrown underhand with the plane of the blade horizontal. The throw is made using the same stance and swing as with the underhand tomahawk throw, holding the knife in a straight line with the wrist and forearm. Depending on the distance, the knife can be so controlled as to make it a half turn, full turn, or even 1.5 turns to stick point first. A slight flip as it leaves your hand will control the spin, but you need considerable practice for each type of throw before you find the correct distance to stand and still retain maximum control. At short distances, the knife can be rifled forward without any flip or spin to fly straight to the target, but for sporting purposes, you should stand at least 15 feet away from the mark and try for either a half or full spin with the underhand flip. You will find that you can successfully toss the knife for a half spin at about the same distance required for that overhand full spin. Here again, perfect timing, control, and rhythm are necessary if you are to master this style of throwing. The similarity in techniques will be obvious to you when you compare tomahawk and knife throwing in the underhand throw. The rate of spin is much slower using the underhand method with both knife and tomahawk than it is when throwing either weapon overhand, but the underhand style provides an excellent opportunity to sharpen your skill and adds novelty to any throwing session.